All right. When we think about Egypt, we really, geographically speaking, Egypt is completely dependent on the Nile. The Nile flows from south to north. So Upper Egypt is actually below Lower Egypt on the map. And these two regions become unified in the early dynastic period, which is around 3000 BCE. And we actually see a really powerful telling here of the unification of these two regions of Egypt on the palette of King Narmer. This is a relief work that's made of slate. It's about 2 feet high. It's a ceremonial version of a utilitarian object. So typically palettes would have a little indentation. It's what we're looking at here on this side, that would be used to mix makeup. Egyptians wore makeup around their eyes to protect themselves from the powerful sun, kind of necessary when you live close to the equator. And the unification of Egypt, it's something that happens over centuries, and there's actually particular aspects of unification that are still debated today, but we see some of the key events here. What we have is the king depicted, King Narmer here on the A side. He is depicted again in hierarchical scale to signify his importance. And we see this little servant figure carrying his sandals behind him to show his prestige. And um, the king is holding here this smaller figure kind of in submission, to depict the triumph of Upper Egypt over Lower Egypt. And on the back here as well, we have all of these other symbols. Oh, for example, here we also have the hawk god Horus kind of looking over the scene. And we see here that actual indentation is created by these two long-necked felines with intertwined necks to again signify the unification of Egypt. Now, the kings of Egypt in this early dynastic period, they really emphasize the theme of timelessness and permanence in their portraiture. And in the image of King Khafre that we see here, we see Khafre. It looks like he's just kind of fused to this stone. He's so static. He's so rigid. It gives us the impression that Khafre's rule will never end. And he also wears some of the traditional royal costume to emphasize his status as well. So all kings wore that short kind of kilt, the long linen headdress, and the goatee. And that goatee, always fake. It's this little tie-on goatee that was symbolic of royalty. And again, we also have Horus, the hawk god. He's kind of perched, giving Khafre's head a little hug here, showing that he is, he's approving of Khafre's reign. Korea has a long history of different kingdoms kind of vying for power, but it is the Silla kingdom that kind of unifies the Korean peninsula in the medieval period, kind of in the early Middle Ages. And prior to the arrival of Buddhism in Korea, Koreans practiced shamanism, which is a kind of nature worship that requires the expertise of a priest-like figure called a shaman who intercedes to alleviate problems facing the community. And the Silla kingdom, the Silla royalty, upheld shamanistic practices in ceremonial rites such as coronations and memorial services. And we have this crown artifact from the Silla kingdom that would have been worn by a member of the royal family to emphasize the power of the wearer through the display of precious materials here and the nature imagery. So this is a large crown that would be worn around the forehead, and it looks like it almost has kind of tree-like branches extending off of the headband part. And this natural motif connects, of course, to shamanism, but we also see the use of gold, the use of turquoise as well to create this very precious object. And specifically here, not just the turquoise, but also really there's a lot more jade that is used here. The jade, especially when we look at the detail on the left, it almost looks like there's little berries, little fruit hanging from the tree branches that could symbolize fertility, abundance, and prosperity. All right, we're going to look at a few Greek and Roman examples now, kind of from the late Greek period when there's a huge transition happening in the Mediterranean. And I love how so many of you have really been captivated by classical Greece and classical Rome. And here we see a large floor mosaic. The Romans, as you know, they loved the Greeks so much, they often copied Greek artworks. And here we see a Roman mosaic that is copied from a Greek painting. It's a little bit damaged, so we don't have all the pieces, but it's depicting an important battle that took place in the late Greek period between Alexander the Great and Darius of Persia. Alexander is an important figure in late classical Greek history because he created a huge empire, bringing together all of the different Greek city-states, conquering them, and adding more territory. He was taught by the best of the best. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, was his tutor, even though Alexander wasn't Greek himself. He was Macedonian. But he made it his mission to spread Greek culture throughout his kingdom. And what we see is this really energetic composition, this really full battle scene that depicts to us this crucial moment where Alexander confronts and attempts to kill Darius. Alexander here, let's go back here. We see Alexander here on the left, Darius on the right, but I think it's in the details where we really see the heightened intensity and drama. Alexander wears a breastplate here that depicts Medusa. Remember the snake hair scary lady? So this is a really kind of intimidating image here, and he is so intense, just calmly staring down his foe across the composition. And look at how scared Darius looks. He's in this chariot that seems completely out of control. His frightened charioteer here is trying to wrangle the horses and flee the battle, but boy, we can see the whites of Darius' eyes, and he looks very concerned. So at the death of Alexander, we usher in this very late period in Greek classical history that's called the Hellenistic period. And in this period, we see a huge diversity spring up in the Eastern Mediterranean, and we see the kind of fall of the traditional Greek city-states, places like Athens, and we see more focus on places like Pergamon. And Pergamon is here in Asia Minor. This is the west coast of Turkey today. And we're going to focus on this massive victory altar that the king of Pergamon had constructed in 175 BCE. So this Pergamon, the city, sits on a hill And he and Attalus the First, the ruler of Pergamon, he wanted his city to be a kind of new Athens, a capital of culture, political power, and he started a huge building campaign of different temples, libraries, and then this big altar. And Attalus had a major military victory over the Gauls, a culture, a tribe from northern Europe who attempted to invade. And Attalus wanted to celebrate his triumph over the Gauls with this huge altar. Here we see it in the model that's dedicated to Zeus. And this is what the altar looks like today. It was stolen by some German scholars in the 19th century and brought to a museum in Berlin. And let's look at, again, another really emotionally charged, very dramatic battle scene here. The sculptures are all contorted, twisted. They're pulling at each other's hair. They're spilling out onto the steps of the altar itself. It's as if we are being drawn into this battle scene ourselves. It really demands that the viewer responds physically and emotionally. This is not the kind of calm, cool austerity of earlier Greek work. And if we look at another sculpture from Pergamon, we see here a chief, a Gallic chief, who realizes that his defeat is imminent, and so he's killing his wife and killing himself. And look at the intensity of his face. Think about Bernini's David that we saw last week. I mean, we talk about that drama and intensity of Bernini and his era of art called the Baroque. Sometimes this type of art is called Hellenistic Baroque because it's this larger than life kind of drama, and all of these diagonal lines here, across the body of the female here too. There's so much twisting and contorting that really makes this a much more intriguing, a much more dynamic sculptural composition.